At the Global Liver Institute, we believe it all starts with a patient. So what happens when a patient, a liver patient no less, one of the 500 million people living with conditions that often go undiagnosed, untreated, or misdiagnosed, mistreated, and stigmatized, brings the challenges of liver patients front and center? And what happens when a patient then leads a discussion with world experts in policy, research, clinical care, and wellness on ways to overcome these challenges? Let's find out today on GLI Live.
All right. Hello and welcome. I'm Jeff McIntyre. I'm filling in for Donna Cryer today for today's episode. I'm the Vice President of Liver Health Programs here at the Global Liver Institute. You know, and throughout this month of March, we've really been featuring some of our favorite authors here at GLI to share their work and how patient advocates can apply their insights in their lives and in their advocacy. And hot damn, we got a great one for you today. Today, I'm really super delighted to welcome the prolific pediatric endocrinologist, author, and researcher, Robert Lustig, MD, the author of Metabolical and Professor Emeritus at the University of California, San Francisco, and someone who we spoke a little bit before the show, who has been a great inspiration in a lot of the work I've done around childhood obesity, representing the facts, but representing the facts to the people that count. Dr. Lustig, Rob, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff. My pleasure.
Let's start on a really fundamental level. I want to go to the book Metabolical, that is such a favorite of mine. And one of the things that when I first read it, it really popped for me, you know, kind of, I think probably coming out of Michael Pollan got his 6 words out there in Omnivore's Dilemma. But you really
don't make it any better than it was 7.
Fair enough.
Eat
but
food,
you really
not too much, mostly plans. That's 7 words.
You really emphasize the phrase "protect the liver, feed the gut" in Metabolical,
because that's 6 words.
so let's hone in for that for liver patients and folks watching this. Why the liver instead of other parts of the cardiometabolic system? That really struck me in a book about metabolism. You went to protect the liver. Why so?
Well, first of all, the liver is the detoxification organ. And what we have really here is a series of metabolic toxins that the liver is responsible for. The problem is the dose determines the poison. Now, there are some poisons that will kill you in parts per billion, like sarin or ricin or VX gas. There are some toxins that will kill you in parts per million, like, for instance, arsenic or carbon tetrachloride. But there are other toxins that will kill you at a higher dose, like, for instance, alcohol and sugar. And it turns out that's what we have. We have an pandemic, really, of liver disease secondary to metabolic toxins, which happen to also masquerade as food. Alcohol, you know, well-known liver toxin. Fructose, less well-known, but in fact, what fructose does to the liver is exactly the same thing as what alcohol does to the liver. And it makes sense that would be the case because, after all, where do you get alcohol from? Fermentation of fructose. It's called wine. You know, we do it in Napa and Sonoma every day. The big difference between the two is that for alcohol, the yeast does the first step of metabolism, which is called glycolysis. For fructose, we do our own first step. But after that, the liver can't tell the difference. And the point is, that's why children today get the diseases of alcohol without alcohol. Type 2 diabetes and fatty liver disease were the diseases of alcohol until 5-year-olds started getting them. So we have to protect the liver. We have to protect children from the toxins that destroy the liver. So protect the liver is number one.
So I want to come back to fructose in a moment because I think there's a lot to dig in there. But to help us better understand a condition, sometimes a contrast can help us better understand that. And so when we speak about fatty liver disease, we often talk about this kind of progressive set of certain chronic symptoms, if you will. We talk about a symptomology. To compare, how would you define the opposite of that? How would you define healthy, or say metabolically healthy, for one's liver? What would that look like?
Well, in order to understand what a healthy liver is, it actually helps us understand what an unhealthy liver is first. Usually it's the other way around. When you talk about fatty liver disease, it depends on who you read. They will tell you that there are two hits to the liver. The first is the fat in the liver, and the second is the inflammation that comes after. I'm going to tell you actually there are three hits. And when you understand the three hits and what they are, everything comes into focus as to how best to mitigate those for a healthy liver. So the first hit is the turning of substrate into fat in the liver. So this is a process called de novo lipogenesis, new fat making. And it doesn't come from dietary fat. Dietary fat cycles through the liver like LDL, but doesn't actually stick in the liver. So in fact, it's the fat that's made in the liver from alcohol or from sugar that ultimately is the generator of this de novo lipogenesis. It's the substrate that drives that. And therefore, you've got to then do something with that fat. And that's where the second and the third hits come. Okay. The second hit is getting the fat out of the liver. So you have to package the fat, and the fat gets packaged into molecules called triglycerides or triacylglycerols. You package the lipid with a protein called ApoB, apolipoprotein B, and then you secrete it out as triglyceride, also known as VLDL, very low density lipoproteins. Well, that ApoB has choline as part of it. Phosphatidylcholine is part of that ApoB. Well, choline turns out to be an extremely important substance for the body. It used to be called vitamin B4, but it has now been changed to choline. And the reason is because you can choline can be manufactured in the intestine if you have the right components. So that sort of made it not a vitamin anymore. But choline is still very important. Turns out that the patients with the worst fatty liver disease are the patients who have the least amount of choline. So they can't package the fat that they've made in order to be able to export it out. An example, my colleague here at the University of California, San Francisco, Dr. Jackie Marr, she studies the methionine choline deficient rat. Mm-hmm. And the methionine is necessary because it's the generator of methyl groups to make glutathione, which is the most important liver antioxidant to suppress the inflammation, and also choline being the important thing for being able to export the fat out of the liver. So the methionine choline deficient rat, the MCD rat, not the McDonald's rat, but it might as well be, because it is the fastest generator of fatty liver disease there is. Huh. So we have data that shows that the amount of choline in the liver predicts negatively the amount of fat that ends up getting stored. So choline deficiency means more fat in the liver getting stored because you can't get it out. So there's increased production, decreased clearance. And then the third hit is the inflammation itself. And that's where the antioxidants come in. And so we now know that the less the antioxidant capacity, the greater the level of inflammation because of the generation of reactive oxygen species, what is known as oxidative stress. And fat is one of the primary drivers of that reactive oxygen species. Defective mitochondria are the generator of reactive oxygen species. Well, sugar is a primary metabolic toxin because it actually generates more reactive oxygen species and decreased mitochondrial function. So you can see that the consumption of sugar and the inability to move it out because of ultra-processed food with lack of antioxidants, lack of choline, is a primary, if not sole, driver of fatty liver disease today.
So is this something that's going to be specific to the liver? Because I think when people think about obesity, they think about metabolic syndrome, they think about adiposity building, in various parts of the body as well. But as we're focused on the liver, especially in this, reverse relationship with choline, is this something that is unique to the liver, or is it just that the effects are unique to the liver?
Well, the point is you can have metabolic syndrome in virtually any organ.
Right.
Okay? The liver is sort of ground zero for metabolic perturbation because the liver is the detoxification organ, as we talked about before. Mm-hmm. But you can have metabolic syndrome of the ovary. We call that polycystic ovarian disease. You can have metabolic syndrome of the heart. We call that congestive cardiomyopathy. You can have metabolic syndrome of the brain. We call that Alzheimer's disease. Okay. Now, it's true that choline is a problem for the liver because only the liver exports fat. Right. The others have to utilize it. They don't export it. They can either break it down or burn it. Only the liver exports it. So that's a specific issue for the liver. But in fact, any organ can manifest its form of metabolic syndrome. And you don't have to be obese to have metabolic syndrome. In fact, there are more thin sick people than there are fat sick people in the United States. They just don't know it. Yeah. In fact, 93% of Americans manifest some form of metabolic dysfunction, and only 65% of them are overweight and obese.
Yeah, I've seen this before. I mean, especially I think when you point to, all-cause mortality, that's something that plays into that distinction quite often as well. I want to ask a question kind of because there's been a lot of activity in the liver space over the past week. And just kind of get your view on this, that, we saw, for instance, in the past week-ish, that we had the approval for our first medication to treat NASH, specifically
resveratrol,
specifically F2, F3. It's very specifically indicated in this. I thought there's a lot that's interesting that we could talk about in that, but I think one of the things that I thought was so interesting in this is that the labeling cites that it should be prescribed, quote unquote, in conjunction with diet and exercise.
Indeed.
What is the role you see in medication for patients with liver fibrosis? And so we're talking more upper F3, if you will. And what's the role? So what's the role for medication? And then what's the role for diet and exercise to address these other aspects?
I was very excited to see this new medication. It is a thyroid hormone receptor beta agonist. Now, thyroid hormone has two receptors. One's called the TR alpha, the other one's called TR beta. And TR alpha is primarily the cardiovascular, the speeding up of the heart and increasing metabolic rate. TR beta actually has to do with lipid processing. And we've actually known about this for many years. The person who distinguished TR alpha and TR beta was a professor here at UCSF by the name of John Baxter. And he actually had a company that was looking at TR beta agonists as pharmaceuticals. So it's great to see that one has finally made it to market. Having said that, that's not fixing the entire problem. Mm-hmm. The problem is that without the fat, there is no inflammation. So you can be choline deficient and you can have ROSs, but unless there's fat, there's no inflammation. So the fat comes first. So that's stage 1 steatosis. And we still have to do something about that. And this medicine apparently is not for that. It is for stage 2 or stage 3. So we still have to solve the stage 1 problem. That is the de novo lipogenesis. That is the laying down of the liver fat in the first place. And to be honest with you, the only way I know how to do that is to take away the offending substrate. Mm-hmm. That can either be alcohol or it can be sugar.
It reminds me of a quote from Archbishop Desmond Tutu that says that after a while, you have to go upriver and seeing what is throwing all the bodies in at this point. Right. This is a great kind of segue for the next question, which is, I do feel like in our society, tobacco and alcohol have probably received more awareness around negative health effects. I do think that some of that has been litigation driven, if you will, especially around tobacco in this case. But I really don't feel like refined sugar and fructose, especially high fructose corn syrup, have gotten their due in that regard. Now, for liver patients that we have that may be in our audience today, can you talk a little bit about fructose and why it's a special concern for the liver? We've talked about choline, but I know that fructose, it's more of a concern for the liver than, say, other parts of the digestive tract. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, so, people say a calorie is a calorie. Okay. You have to start there and debunk that. Okay. And I need to be able to debunk that for your audience, because this is a commonly held belief that it's about calories. The only reason that we believe that is because the food industry told us that it was so, not because it's true. This is their way of actually assuaging their culpability for what they've done to our food supply and done to chronic disease. Okay. A calorie is not a calorie. All right. How do I prove that to you? All right, let's start. You like almonds?
Love them.
I love almonds too. Okay. You eat 160 calories in almonds. How many of those 160 calories do you absorb?
Good question.
130. What happened to the other 30? Turned out the fiber in the almonds, the soluble and insoluble fiber, work together to form a gel on the inside of your intestine. The insoluble fiber, like cellulose, formed a lattice work like a fishnet. The soluble fiber plug the holes in the fishnet, and together they form an impenetrable secondary barrier that prevents absorption of glucose, fructose, sucrose, simple starches, so that the liver is protected. Fiber is the antidote to liver dysfunction, because fiber keeps the food from getting there in the first place.
Interesting.
Well, so the point is, if you eat 160 and you only absorb 130, a calorie wasn't a calorie, because if it came with its inherent fiber, those calories weren't for you. They were for your intestinal bacteria. Your microbiome chews them up for its own purposes. So that's why the almonds are fine. It's also why fruit is fine. People always yell at me, but what about fruit? The answer is the fruit has the fiber. It's the fruit juice that's the problem. And by the way, fruit juice has been shown to cause fatty liver disease too, not just soda. All right, so there's one example. Second example, protein. Now, if you're using an amino acid to build muscle, the amino acid will go straight to the muscle. Okay. But what if you're not building muscle? What if you're a mere mortal like me and you're not a bodybuilder? You eat protein, the enzymes in your intestine cleave it into individual amino acids. You absorb the amino acids, but you're not building muscle. Where do the excess amino acids go? Well, they go to the liver. The liver takes the amino group off, deamidates it. Okay, now you've got an organic acid, and then that organic acid can be burned in the mitochondria for energy. Okay, that's good. Well, it turns out in order to take that amino group off, to turn it into something for energy, it costs energy. So you had to input energy to get energy out. And it turns out you had to put more energy in than to get a carbohydrate ready for burning. So if you're eating protein, there's a differential loss of energy because a calorie is not a calorie. Number 3, fats. So over here we have omega-3 fatty acids, heart healthy, save your life, anti-Alzheimer's, anti-inflammatory, best thing you can put in your body. And over here we have trans fats, the devil incarnate. Okay, they're both 9 calories per gram. One will save your life, one will kill you. Why? Because a calorie is not a calorie. Mm-hmm. Depends on where those calories are. And finally, fructose and glucose. So glucose is the energy of life. Every cell on the planet burns glucose for energy. Mm-hmm. Fructose is a mitochondrial toxin. Glucose is not. Glucose makes mitochondria work better. Fructose makes mitochondria work worse. Having nothing to do with calories, having everything to do with mitochondrial dysfunction. So the calories have to go out the window. Kill the calorie. Hashtag kill the calorie. Right? Let's talk about metabolic burden. let's talk about metabolic health, not calories, not nutrition, but rather what happens inside the cell. And fructose, because of this effect on mitochondria, is worse. In addition, fructose causes increased reactive oxygen species compared to glucose because it's a 5-membered ring that splits apart easily, whereas glucose is a 6-membered ring that splits apart much less well. And that 5-membered ring has a reactive keto group, which generates lots of glycation, really fructation, and reactive oxygen species, which glucose does not. So those are the 2 things that fructose does that glucose doesn't. And then the third thing is addiction, because fructose stimulates the reward center and glucose doesn't.
Yeah.
So you put those 3 things together, the de novo lipogenesis, the fructation and reactive oxygen species, and finally the addiction, and you have a recipe for disaster.
I do see that we are beginning to, I think, somewhat through the potosphere and somewhat through the building of science, beginning to understand a little bit better about the science of addiction and about, well, frankly, about how companies have manipulated that, over time in order to feed, especially younger children, these sort of things. I was going to ask you to kind of break down fructose in the same way that you break down a sugary, soda or cereal. But I think you kind of just did that in the same way that you did with almonds. It deconstructed that a little bit.
You have to understand that there's science here.
Yeah.
Okay? And the food industry doesn't want you to understand that. So, and we've basically been able to debunk what they call nutrition. And it turns out that, we have an industry documents library here at UCSF. We have the tobacco industry documents library. We have the opioid industry documents library. We're developing the petroleum documents library. And we have the food industry documents library. And we're actually looking to see whether or not, they're the same people. We're actually using etymological analysis to actually determine whether or not the documents were written by the same people. And guess what? They are. This is a well-worn playbook. And we have to take this whole concept of industry-sponsored nutrition and throw it out the window.
When I was working prior life in my career, specifically working in childhood obesity and food marketing, one of the things that we would do is go, react to something that had happened and went, that's the tobacco playbook. We can see them doing it. We can see, how they're reacting, how they're questioning the science, then how they go back and use one study to try to, invalidate a longitudinal meta-analysis of some sort, and it's disheartening, but it's not new. We're onto them in this regard. We know that this is happening. Let me ask this, if I may, and I think, we see diet soda, we see other things that are portrayed to us. I think especially when you look at risk and marginalized populations, what we're referring to are systems that are kind of lined up against them, but then made to feel like, well, you're lazy, or you're just, you need to prepare all your produce meals by hand out of your own garden, aside of your 2 jobs and kids and single parenthood and that sort of stuff. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about myths and misunderstandings that people may have about our food system, especially those that would be detrimental to liver health. But I see so much stuff that's out there. There's so much that circles about people trying to make healthy decisions. What would you say some of the leading myths or misunderstandings about our food system are?
Right. So the first is that ultra-processed food is food. That's a myth. Okay. So is ultra-processed food food? Just because the food industry said it is doesn't make it so. So what's the definition of food? Substrate that contributes either to the growth or burning of an organism. Terrific definition, 100%.
Yeah.
Right? Growth or burning. So any substance that passes your lips that contributes to either growth or burning is food. And you would say, well, fructose is 4 calories per gram. Therefore, it contributes to burning. Therefore, it's food. You would be wrong. You would be wrong. And the reason is because fructose inhibits those 3 mitochondrial enzymes we talked about. It inhibits AMP kinase, it inhibits acyl-CoA dehydrogenase long chain, it inhibits carnitine palmitoyltransferase 1, ultimately decreasing the ATP output from any individual mitochondrion. So in fact, fructose actually inhibits burning. Glucose stimulates it, fructose inhibits it. Number 2, okay, growth. My colleague, Dr. Efrat Monsonigo Ornan, who is the chairman of nutrition at Hebrew University, Jerusalem, looked at this question. Does ultra-processed food contribute to growth? It actually inhibits growth. It inhibits bone growth. It inhibits longitudinal bone growth, cancellous bone growth, skeletal bone growth, trabecular bone growth. It reduces calcium deposition into bone. It increases fracture risk, reduces tensile strength. It does increases osteoporosis. It does everything but growth. So if a substance does not contribute to growth and does not contribute to burning, is it a food?
So I'm going to take half a step back and ask you, define then ultra processed for our audience. We define food because there are these distinctions about, eat natural, eat organic, eat processed, ultra processed. Where do you draw the line in there?
So my colleague, Dr. Carlos Montero, who is a public health epidemiologist at the University of Sao Paulo, has done us all a great service and has developed a classification system for food processing. So on the side of the package, you only know what's in the food. I don't care what's in the food. I care what's been done to the food, because it turns out that's what's important. And that's not listed on the side of the label. But Carlos has developed this system called the NOVA system that actually will tell you the degree of processing, and has actually now validated that system, because it turns out that only the ultra-processed food is detrimental. All food is inherently healthy. It's what we do to the food that's not. So how does the NOVA system work? Best way to explain quickly is an apple. Okay, an example, an apple. So NOVA class 1 would be an apple picked off a tree. NOVA class 2 would be apple slices, destemmed, deseeded, maybe deskinned. NOVA class 3 would be apple sauce, macerated, cooked, maybe preservative added, possibly with added sugar and possibly not. NOVA class 4 would be a McDonald's apple pie. Now, the question is there any NOVA class 1 in that NOVA class 4? Is there any apple in that McDonald's apple pie? Only McDonald's knows for sure. Point is, if you look at the degree of processing through this NOVA system, it turns out only the NOVA class 4 items in the grocery store are associated with chronic disease. The NOVA class 1 through 3 are not. Only NOVA class 4 generates a signal. But it turns out NOVA class 4 is 73% of the American grocery store. So how can you navigate the grocery store when 3 out of 4 items there will kill you? Well, my colleagues, Wolfram Alderson and Andreas Kornstadt and I, have developed a computer program, which will be an app eventually, to help you do that. It is called Perfect, P-E-R-F-A-C-T, and you can find it online at http://perfect.co. And what you can do is you can shop your grocery store, not somebody else's, but your grocery store, based on the SKUs, based on the online existence of the various items in that store, 40,000 to 80,000 items, okay? And it will tell you what is healthy for you. If you want to do it by the NOVA system, we have a NOVA filter. If you want to do it by metabolic syndrome, we have a metabolic syndrome filter. If you want to do it by allergens, because maybe you have celiac disease or peanut allergy or whatever else, you can utilize those filters instead. The point is, you can basically put in your biochemical profile, and you can limit the grocery store to only the things that are good for you. That's a great way of being able to discount and get rid of all the stuff that's a problem. because you can't figure out when you walk in the store what's what, because it doesn't say it on the label. Plus, how many labels you think you're going to be able to read? Well, this does it for you.
Well, and, can you trust your labels? I mean, I remember a sugary cereal a while back, through quote unquote fortifications, that was a super high sugar cereal promised to boost children's immunity. And it was like,
yes, I remember it was Kellogg's.
Yeah, come on, man. I mean, it's like, it just didn't pass the laugh test. I mean, that was, I don't know how it got through bureaucracy. But
do you know who got that removed from Kellogg's packaging?
Do tell.
Me. along with the San Francisco district attorney.
Yeah, excellent. I use it in my presentations now, though. I found a box of it in the wild, and took a photo of it and use it in my presentations now. And people act like that's absolutely absurd. There's no way that sort of thing could exist. But it's a thing.
All they did was increase the amount of vitamin C by 20%. Boost immunity.
Yeah, I mean, you might as well be putting it into a bowl of gravel.
If the industry makes a health claim, it's the opposite.
Yeah, and we've seen this, haven't we? I mean, we've seen this at the FDA over the past year or so, when they made the claim that added sugars were actually, considered, that they wanted to reframe the definition of healthy to include added sugars in that way. It's so incredibly frustrating. I want to be respectful of time. I really appreciate your time here, Rob, and going deep into the weeds with us on this. I could do this. I could be your worst cocktail party nightmare, I think. I want to end with two things.
Your patients need to be careful about cocktail parties.
Yeah, mocktail. We'll say mocktail. We're very good about that at Global Liver, actually. We do mocktails, and I've had many a fight about having sodas at any of our events. I want to ask about, it kind of plays on this theme about reliable nutrition information. You've talked about PerFact. Well, I hope they trademarked that. That was a great term. Where can liver patients go for reliable nutrition advice? It's just the Wild West out there, I feel like, for so many patients. And somebody's saying keto this or Atkins that, or, reminds me of growing up, and people would talk about the pineapple diet and all these kind of goofy things that are said with great authority, with somebody that's got last in their class MD attached to their name. Right. Where can patients go for reliable nutrition information?
It's hard. I'm going to tell you it's hard. And I will tell you, anybody who has a diet, has obviously something to sell you. And so you have to be very careful. I have no diet to sell you. Okay. It's about real food. The problem is, what's real food? If you think Cheetos is food, all is lost. The fiber in food is essential. It's essential for your microbiome. The point is, if you've got liver disease, you do not need your liver detoxifying stuff. Mm-hmm. All right. So you want to limit the things that can harm your liver. Well, fiber is a great way to keep stuff from reaching your liver, because fiber changes microbial diversity and develops this gel on the inside of the intestine to prevent nutrients from moving in, like the almond story. Okay. In addition, you don't want to provide anything that generates more reactive oxygen species. Well, what does that? Well, refined carbohydrate and sugar are the worst for that. Trans fats are really the worst, but they're coming out of food. All right. And then finally, all right, what else do you need? Well, you need things that will help support liver function and be anti-inflammatory. And that's omega-3s. All right. So less omega-6s, more omega-3s. I have just described a high fiber, low refined carbohydrate, low sugar, high omega-3 diet. I have just described real food. And if you want a specific subset of real food that you can put your head around, I would say it's the Mediterranean diet. Mediterranean diet is all of those things.
Right.
So if I were a liver patient, I would be focused on the Mediterranean diet as sort of the archetypical best diet for liver disease. That's how I would look at this.
So I was going to end with a question about something tangible that patients can take with them, but I think you're getting to that. And so I'm going to go off script a little bit and ask one question about that thing, which is the Mediterranean diet that you're talking about. Are there cultural equivalents to that? Because I think, where I grew up in the deep South, if somebody told me I needed the Mediterranean diet, my eyes would glaze over thinking I had to eat grape leaves and olives. For folks in the obesity belt, we certainly see fatty liver disease higher in Latin populations and that obesity belt that comes through. Talk a little bit about how the Mediterranean diet can be translated, if you will.
Well, ultimately, it's real food that matters. Okay, in the obesity belt in the southeast, okay, you have this thing. Okay, it's called sweet tea. Okay, I'd say get rid of the sweet tea, and you're 50% of the way there.
Yeah, amen.
Okay, ultimately, you have to limit the toxin exposure, and the southeast of America is shall we say, ground zero for all the toxins. And it's not just the nutritional toxins. It's not just the toxins in food. It's the toxins in the water. It's the toxins in the environment. My colleagues and I just published a paper showing it's actually the reactive oxygen species that are driving adiposity. So ROSs are a cellular autocrine mechanism for changing how energy gets metabolized in any given cell. So the more ROSs you generate, the more adiposity you generate. Well, there are ROS reducing diets. Well, I just told you what they are. So can you do that in the Southeast? Yes, you can. The food is there, but you have to know what it is. All right. It's not going to be fried in trans fats. It's not going to be sweet tea. It's going to be real food prepared naturally, with some butter. That'll work because butter's saturated fat. That's not going to hurt your liver. All right. There are ways in every culture, the Japanese diet, the Mediterranean diet, the ketogenic diet, the paleo diet. There are, multiple different diets that take advantage of less sugar, more fiber. That's what I would say. Less sugar, more fiber, more omega-3s, and fewer emulsifiers. Well, you only find the emulsifiers in processed food. Okay. The omega-3s are specifically kept out of processed food because, they have a fishy taste.
Right.
Okay. The fiber's been removed from processed food because you can't freeze fiber. And the sugar makes processed food palatable. So I would say that everything about processed food is dangerous. And real food is where you want to go. And can you get real food in the obesity belt? Well, you can.
And it's amazing when you do. So to draw to a conclusion, protect the liver, feed the gut, less sugar, more fiber. Rob Lustig, thank you so much for joining us today. We've held you over, and I really appreciate the conversation, some insights for our patients that are dealing with liver disease and looking at those that are at risk for fatty liver disease especially. You're quite prolific. I want to give you a chance. Do you have anything coming up? Are there things that you have going on that you'd like to share? Where can our audience find you for more information?
I'm easy to find, robertlustig.com. Okay. And my books are easy to find too. Fat Chance, Hacking the American Mind, and Metabolical. I will mention, since you've offered me the opportunity, I did say more fiber is good, right? Well, fiber is great, except that ultra-processed food doesn't have any, and ultra-processed food's not going away. And I'm not even sure we want it to go away because we have to feed 10 billion people by the year 2050. But we still have to mitigate the metabolic risk. I am the co-founder and chief medical officer of a fiber company, and it's a unique fiber. It is called Biolumin. The product is called Munch Munch, and you can find it online at munchmunch.shop. And what it is it's a combination soluble, insoluble fiber. It is a microcellulose sponge, 7 microns in diameter, flows like a powder, can be added to food, and you won't even know it's there because your tongue can't discern it because it's colorless, odorless, tasteless, textureless. So it can be added to chocolate, it can be added to bean dip, it can be added to microwave lasagna, it can be added to virtually any food that's not aqueous. In your stomach, it will swell 70-fold over its original size. The sponges will basically like so. And impregnated in the nooks and the crannies in the sponge are a set of proprietary hydrogels, soluble fiber, that will sequester, soak up, absorb glucose, fructose, sucrose, simple starches so that they never reach the liver. Wow. And that they will ultimately feed the microbiome. In other words, they are recapitulating the effects of fiber on the food, even though it's processed. We are turning apple juice back into apples in the intestine. This might be very, very good for a liver disease population.
Excellent. We'll investigate and look forward to hearing more about it. And hopefully this will not be our last conversation. Endocrinologist, author, researcher, Robert Lustig, we really thank you for joining us here with Global Liver today. And we will see you, and see what my official outro is thank you again for joining us. Rob, we appreciate this, and we'll see you next time on GLI Live.
Thank you.
Please be sure to like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts and suggestions in the comments below. Join us weekly on Wednesdays at noon Eastern Time for more episodes of GLI Live. Check out our website, globalliver.org, and follow us on social media to learn more about the Global Liver Institute and stay up to date with the latest in liver health. Until next time, stay safe, stay well,